Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the last session of our CropCon 2022. This is going to be a session about the end of the life cycle of our pesticides and our agricultural remedies. And we have 4 speakers lined up for this afternoon. With me on the stage is Mishelle Govender. She's the Chief Director of Hazardous Waste Management and Licensing at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. And virtual will be Kirsten Barnes from the SA Plastics Pact, Mr. Walter Jordaan from MyPlas, and then lastly Koot Human from DromMonster. So we will get a lot of information from our speakers today. I would like you to listen and maybe start jotting down a few notes. And without any further ado, can I then call on Kirsten Barnes to present to us what is the problem with plastics in the world? And she's from the South African Plastics Pact, and that is an association of like-minded people that work on recycling of plastics.
So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm Kirsten Barnes, Project Lead of the South African Plastics Pact and a Circular Economy Analyst at Green Cape. So today I want to share with you on plastics and how we can re-envision them from being problematic to having sustained value in our economy. So plastics are often addressed as a problem, and this is in part due to the strengths of plastics, which also are their weakness. So in terms of plastics, they are durable. So some of the properties that make them useful, they're durable, which means they persist in the environment. They're lightweight, which means they can often leak from waste management systems. And the packaging, for example, is manufactured for very specific barrier properties. And there's a range of different plastic products that are manufactured for very specific performance. So there's a lot of complexity in the type of plastics we produce. And that's also not to mention the many different possible shapes and forms, which also puts pressure on our systems. So what we can see then is that this has very visible impacts. And this is a picture of a Durban beach after recent heavy rains. And we can see the predominance of plastics in the litter on the beach. So this has resulted in overwhelmed waste management systems. The scale of our plastic production, the complexity of our plastic production means, and the fact that we haven't specifically designed systems to handle those, means that our systems are overwhelmed. So at the end of life of our plastics, we're not able to manage the volume, and this is the same across developed and developing country contexts. So we have highly visual impacts of pollution, we see impacts on infrastructure such as blocked drains, and impacts on human and ecosystem health. So clearly the way that we design and use plastics, manage them end of life, needs to change. And if we look at a different paradigm, so we currently produce, use, and waste our plastics in very much a linear fashion. So we look particularly in the packaging, it's predominantly at a single-use packaging. So we look to maximize production. The use phase is very limited. There's a very limited lifespan of usefulness for that packaging, and it gets wasted quickly and often ends up in landfill. So it's very much a linear system. If, however, we re-envision our plastics as a valuable commodity, we'll rethink the way that we design them and what we do with those plastics during their use phase and then after its first life. So if we look at a circular economy for plastics, we need to rethink the inputs to our plastics. We need to look at renewable feedstocks, and then we need to relook at the way we design and what we do with those plastics to try and maintain their value in our economy. So in terms of the plastics, the circular economy for plastics, what we are particularly looking at today is redesign in the upstream. So if we look at redesign in the upstream, we're looking for redesign for circularity. And if you look at that reuse loop, it's a very high value loop. So it's presented as a much tighter loop. So if we think of plastic packaging, where we take the same packaging and refill it with the same product. So we could think of a business-to-business model with agricultural chemicals, where the consumer of the product then supplies the container once they've used the product back to the producer or brand owner, who might then wash and refill. So in that system, you're thinking of your container, often a very durable product a very high value container, you're seeing it as a resource in your business as the producer or brand owner. So we can think of reuse models. We can also think of redesign for circularity for the plastic packaging material. So for the specific polymer, can we design our packaging so that that particular polymer, that material, has multiple life cycles through our economy for economic development and job creation? So we can think about designing our plastic so that end of life of our plastic packaging, that it has a very high value, which means it's likely to be recovered, that there's businesses, that there's collectors, there's recyclers that can get value from that product, which means it's then likely to loop back again through our economy. What we see in a worrying trend currently is producers designing for recycling or recyclability, but they in essence are only designing for one additional life. So they're designing their packaging that it has a low value end of life. So say it's highly colored, it's got a range of different complex components, which means that the collectors are not likely to collect it. And it often goes into a very low value product. It could be like a plastic wood, or it could be a hybrid material with plastics and mineral components in a construction material. So we're looking to design for multiple lifetimes. And also to note that when we're considering design for circularity, we're also designing for the inclusion of recycled content. And we'll emphasize that again a bit later, or I will later in the presentation. You need to create that demand for the recycled content to go back into packaging, to really drive the recycling, to draw that material through the system. So we're looking at redesign for circularity. We can also look at the supply side. So at the end of life of the plastic packaging, we need to look at the increased recovery of that material. Also, we need to think of if it's going into a recycling loop where that packaging is getting broken down to be remade into another product, we need to think of separation at source. How can we access a high value product that can go into our recycling stream? So recycling is the same as any other process. Rubbish in is rubbish out. So we need to look at high value supply. We can also then look at the recycling system and closing that loop in terms of demand. So if you think of where our recycling rates currently sit for plastics in South Africa, they've stagnated over the last 3 years and even backtracked to some degree. And this is because we see a lag in demand for most polymers. And the markets where you see, so if you can see the other material streams loop, that goes into an open loop recycling. So this looks like, for example, HD milk bottles as a packaging into irrigation pipes in the agricultural sector. So that open loop markets in many of the polymers, those open loop markets are saturated. So where we're lacking is the demand for recycled content back into packaging to really drive our recycling rates and drive our circularity. So demand is another important component that we really need to look at to increase the circularity of our packaging. And we do also need to, there will always be a need for some open loop recycling, so packaging recycled into other products, and we need to emphasize the recycling into high value products. So those products like the irrigation pipes are a high value product. They are often recovered and recycled at end of life as well, unlike something like a plastic wood or a hybrid construction material, including plastics and concrete or some other mineral material. So that's very important to note. So if we're looking at where can we drive a circular economy for plastics and re-envision our plastics as a valuable resource, what is the current state of circularity in plastic packaging in South Africa? And you can see that only about 48% of our plastic packaging on the market currently is recycled at a greater than 30% output recycling rate. So this means more than 30% of the packaging placed on the market in South Africa is actually recycled into new products. And we've called this recycling rate adequate, but just to note, 30% is not a good recycling rate, but this is in the adequate bracket. What is more concerning and what is a big barrier to our circularity is currently the plastic packaging sitting in a 30%, a not recycled or a very poor recycling rate. So that's a less than 15% output recycling rate. So that currently needs to be redesigned. Predominantly that looks like a redesign of that packaging or that redesign of packaging to be more recyclable. There is some movement, there is potential to increase, to actually institute recycling for some of these packaging formats. And then we have the poor recyclability, which is a less than 30%, between 15 and 29% output recycling rate. Some of those formats, there's possible with our new extended producer responsibility that the added investment will mean we're able to push that above 30%, but that is still a point of concern for us in terms of our circularity. So if we look at specific opportunities, I'd like to do a bit of a deeper dive on opportunities in reuse refill and the opportunities in increasing recycled content. So if we look at the reuse loop, so as I mentioned, it's a high value loop. You're really retaining maximum value in your packaging. What could this look like in South Africa? And here we've chosen a couple of packaging format and product combination in the rigid packaging. And I'd like to particularly highlight for this audience the B2B or the business to business opportunities in reuse refill. So here we have PP buckets, which sits in the currently 15 to 29% recycling rate, and the HTB drums, which are well recycled in the country. But we can maintain that packaging at a much higher value. So if you think of a B2B model, this could be paints, this could be edible oils, this could be agricultural chemicals. Can we look at moving 10% of the market currently by weight into reuse, and what would this mean? So if we look at, assuming we've modeled here a factor of 12 reduction in production, so this looks like production of reusable containers. Note these containers are very high value containers. They're maintained for multiple life cycles. They're designed for not just the delivery of product, but the return of the packaging back to the producer. And what we find is in some of these formats, in some of the drums and some of the buckets in particular products, we don't get good recovery, particularly if these are markets which are far, where the product is sold in areas which are very far from recycling markets. We get limited recovery. There just isn't the business case to recover that material. So if we move it to reuse, and as part of that reuse model, there's the reverse logistics built in, and we see an incentive to recover that packaging. So we're modeling an additional 60% recovery, which might not have been recovered. So we see a higher value in containers, a reduction of packaging, of single-use packaging. So we're reducing the burden on our waste management systems, and we see recovery of additional material. So we're increasing the supply at a high quality back into the recycling when those containers do reach end of life. So there's something of potential that we need to explore in reuse. And just to note, increasingly we see legislated reuse targets in Europe and other contexts, and brand owners committing to a percentage of their packaging by weight, or for retailers by SKUs, into reuse, because it's noted as a very useful and an opportunity in circular economy for packaging that has big potential and economic value in South Africa as well. So if we look at opportunities in closing the loop, so this looks like packaging recycled into packaging. What could this look like in our context? And here, these figures that produce this graph were derived by South African Plastics Pact Action Group, and we looked at the possible format product combinations in each of these polymers, so in HD, LD, PET, and PP. So of the formats which could include recycled content, so for everything other than PET, not food contact, what is the average PCR or post-consumer recycled content we could achieve? And these are some of the figures we came up with. This is a combination of a technical feasibility. So what could we, with businesses across the value chain in that action group, from resin producers to packaging manufacturers, brand owners, retailers, recyclers, the producer responsibility organizations, what can we technically achieve, and also what might be operationally feasible? So you'll notice in the PET that we cap it at 25%, because we currently sit at problem and demand for PET, or in supply, sorry, for PET. So what we note is these are the potential average. So if we look at what does that look like in terms of the supply of material back into packaging, we see an additional 63,000 tons of recyclate back into packaging by 2025 in South Africa. And just to note, this is not new additional recyclate in the system. Some of this looks like shifting our current high-value recyclate, which is going into low-value applications. And just as an example, HD milk bottles have a very high value at end of life. That's white HD milk bottles have a very high value end of life. What we see is a large proportion of those milk bottles are getting recycled into carrier bags for retail or refuse bags. We don't need that quality of recyclate in refuse bags or carrier bags. So what we're looking to do is to shift that current material flow back into a high quality application like an HDPE white home and personal care bottle. So there is additional tonnage we need to aim at here, but a lot of this looks like shifting it from a low quality application and maintaining the value of our plastic and our packaging to be able to get cycled multiple times through our economy. So if we look at the potential and the opportunities in including recycled content, we come up with two main barriers. And again, this is the action group discussion of the SA Plastics Pact, and members across the value chain have been active in this group. So what we see is there's not really a technological barrier on the conversion of packaging, so including recycled content at the packaging manufacturers or at the recyclers. We don't really see a recycling capacity currently. There's not a barrier in terms of the amount of capacity in the country to recycle products. We see predominantly two major barriers, supply or demand. And I'm going to focus on the polyolefins, so the HDLDPP. Here, predominantly, we see the biggest barrier to growing recycled content is demand from the brand owners. And there is something of a process to get recycled content approved. But just to note what we've seen recently, with our new mandatory extended producer responsibility, our recyclers have noted an increase in demand for their material, for recycled content to go back into packaging. And then more recently, with the Ukraine crisis driving virgin oil prices up, is we see even more demand at recyclers. And also very interesting to note what we see when brand owners have recycled content approved for their packaging is that they're looking to sign offtake agreements with our recyclers of up to 24 months. So we can learn here from the journey in PET, where the early movers in including recycled content back into PET, so PET beverage bottles to beverage bottles, have secured that input to get recycled content into their products, into their packaging. And those that move late are struggling to get access to recycled content, which means they have limited opportunities, or they're struggling to reach their legislated recycled content targets in the extended producer responsibility legislation. So that's very important to note. We expect to see the same things in the polyolefins. The early movers will get access to the material. The late movers will struggle to get that. And we do expect to see recycled content targets in HD, LD, and PP for the plastic packaging as our EPR system develops. So then, in terms of realizing these opportunities, how do we go about this? And I think it's very important to note that there's no single sector, there's no single organization which can achieve this on its own. And what we see in including recycled content and achieving recycled content and pushing those to high recycled content in terms of packaging, we see a very close partnership needed between packaging manufacturer, the brand owner, and the recycler to achieve this. So we definitely need to see greater partnerships developed. We also see as a driver, as I've mentioned, the extended producer responsibility. We'll see increased demand for recycled content. And just to note, for producers, so brand owners and packaging manufacturers, to achieve your collection and recycling targets in the legislation, we need to up that demand to drive those recycling rates. The recycling rates have lagged because of a lack of demand. We also see our export markets, their bold strides in Europe, Plastic Pact Network countries, and also to note we're part of certain initiatives, and there's growing interest in studies looking at driving regional circularity within the African context, so looking at Southern Africa, Western Africa, Eastern, so certain particular regional loops to increase circularity in packaging. And we recently had at the UNEA 5 meeting in Nairobi in February, we now have under development a global legally binding treaty to address plastic pollution, which has as its core a circular economy approach to achieve reduction in plastic pollution. And we'll see harmonized standards and requirements in terms of circularity. so including reuse models, including recycled content. And that treaty, we should see a full draft within the next 2 years. So we see in South Africa, and again, emphasizing we do have strong indication of the potential in a circular economy for plastic packaging in South Africa, with an additional GDP growth expected, and significant GDP growth expected above what you'd see in a linear economy model. So we see the opportunity and the potential. There are a number of key drivers that will be increasing the effective in our context. So there's opportunities to position our businesses to both create and maintain value in a circular economy for our plastic packaging. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Kirsten. Welcome to our session. She logged in live with us this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your good presentation. I think there might be an opportunity for 1 or 2 questions from the floor. If anybody has a question to pose to Kirsten about the problem of plastics and the opportunities, I think it was very well presented to us. Can I maybe just ask one question to Kirsten? This is the thing about the recycling industry, very much dependent on what the crude oil price does. You mentioned that now, that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is having an impact, so it is driving people to look more towards recyclable materials. But what is the long-term perspective on this in terms of if the fuel or if the crude oil price now drops or stays the same? Is it going to have a long-term impact on the quest from the market for recycling material back into containers, or what is your perspective on that? Kirsten, just unmute yourself, please. We couldn't hear you. Oh, there's a problem with the connection. Okay, we'll come back to you later. Thanks for that. All right, folks. I don't see any hands from the floor, so what I will do now is thank you, Kirsten, again. We might come back to you later with a question or 2. The question is then, based on what Kirsten said to us today, that there must be this desire at the level of the manufacturer to take this PCR content, that's the post-consumer recyclate, into their new packaging. And I'm going to call on Walter Jordaan, who's also logging in with us remotely. He's done a pre-recording of his presentation to tell us, from a perspective of a manufacturer, what's happening at that level. Do we see light at the end of the tunnel, or do we still face an uphill battle? So I'm going to hand over them, and then we listen to what Walter says about the manufacturers.
Good afternoon. I am Walter Jordaan. I'm one of the directors of MyPlas Recycling in Bellville South. I would just like to present a presentation on the end of product life cycle management and our journey that we have been on. Thank you to Dr. Gerhard Verdoorn and Elrise Tronk for the invitation to present our journey and progress on the management and recycling of the HDPE crop protection packaging. I'm going to explain to you where we are, where we came from, and hopefully there's a few suggestions that we can progress into the future. I would like to present to you the 3 Ds on our journey to closing the loop and the progress that we made by partnering with strategic role players. It was just an impossible journey for us to be doing it on our own. And I'd like to start with the don'ts. When we started the recycling business, we went to the farmers and we requested and asked them not to burn their agricultural waste. We've also asked them, please, not to dump the material because there's value in it. And in the recycling business, we can use it. And the one danger that we also saw is the selling of the containers to individuals that might reuse it in food or household applications. It was even more difficult for us to request them to rinse the containers before it was collected. It was just a difficult journey, and we progressed very slowly. Then we went on to the do's. We had to do some changes. We supplied equipment, some of our suppliers, requesting them to do some volume reduction. We had to transport some of the material over long distances, and it was just not cost effective to do that. The effort brought us more material, but many farmers would still rather burn or dump the containers than rinse and give them to our collectors. Although we had a relationship with CropLife, we had to work much closer with them. We asked them for help, and fortunately, they needed ours too. Guidelines for the management of empty crop protection containers has been in place, and we just started to enforce them. A network of certified collectors and recyclers were established nationally, and it was published on the website of CropLife with contact details of suppliers and recyclers in the vicinity. It was now much easier for a farmer to have his containers removed by a certified collector. There were even guidelines. Caps need to be removed and the drums needs to be triple rinsed. Every approved collector and a recycler received a certificate as well as a CODI Intel document where all containers from every collection are documented and sent to CropLife for recording. An electronic version of the CODI Intel document will shortly be available for smartphone use, and the collection data will be automatically stored online. We made some more progress. In 2020, 76% of all crop protection containers were recycled. Slowly but surely, we are moving forward. We had to first ask them, then we had to request for cooperation, and it seems like we have to enforce it now. The third D that I want to present to you is the demand. We reached the ceiling, and the only way that we can improve and increase our volume and the viability was to work on the demand side. Our material went into conduit, it went into water transfer systems, refuse bags, and we even tried calf pens. It was a bumpy ride. This is how we saw ourselves. We noticed that we didn't close the loop. We had to close the loop to have a smooth ride. For more than 5 years, MyPlas approached converters and brand owners without success. But when South Africa signed the Plastics Pact, brand owners and converters became more aware of the benefits of PCR. Commitments were made and targets were set. We made a little bit more progress. MyPlas sent samples once again to converters, and we managed to close the loop. In a first for South Africa, we managed to get approval on Fuchs lubricants that will add post-consumer recycled material in a new range of their 5-liter oil containers. What is even more exciting is that we found approval for a 30% PCR content in a 20-liter crop protection container. There are containers out in the market that's been tested, and hopefully shortly we will get some feedback with the approval and the project can be rolled out. In a first for South Africa, I would like to quote the Managing Director of IPACKCHEM, Mr. Simon Morgan. IPACKCHEM has a long history of implementing sustainable projects like using solar power in our plant in Cosmo City to reduce our annual carbon footprint by avoiding 410,000 kgs of CO2 emissions. The inclusion of PCR into our drums was a natural outcome of our strategy to be the leader in sustainability. The project assists our customers to comply to even more stringent extended producer responsibility regulations and allows us to support the circular economy in UN-certified containers. The project further contributes to IPAC-Chem's ambition to achieving EcoVadis Platinum rating in 2022, a level positioning IPAC-Chem in the top 1% of companies evaluated by EcoVadis globally. You can just imagine how excited we are, and I can only explain it in this video. My next question will be, what next? What can we do from here on? The IPAC-Chem drum is recyclable and it contains 30% PCR. Can we standardize the color of containers to only white? Is it possible that we can identify hazardous, toxic contents in a standardized red or orange container? Is it possible that we can identify products or product categories by different cap colors? Is it possible that labels will have water-soluble glue for easy removal in the wash process? Or can the label be made from polyethylenes to make the recycling process easier? Will we only use HDPE in drum manufacturing? Is it possible not to include barrier-layered materials like nylons or polyesters? And is it possible that we can all work together to achieve our EPR goals? I was just wondering, if we've got to add a value to people, how will we value them? I just can't help to think that in 50 years from now, will our children's children, will they have to write songs like I Can Only Imagine? Or do you think they will be able to still sing with Louis?
What a wonderful world. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Walter, and thank you very much for joining us. It's exactly the way I've come to know Walter, as a man of a lot of plans and a lot of humor, and thank you for your presentation. There's only one question I would like to pose to you, Walter. Do you believe that it is possible for our industry to manufacture a new pesticide drum containing possibly 100% PCR? That should be our ultimate objective, but is that an achievable dream, or is that a pipe dream?
Good afternoon, Gerhard. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
I've got
thank
a
you.
little bit of a bad reception. I think it is achievable. I honestly think that we can manufacture drums with 100% PCR content. There might be challenges, other challenges that we might face in the moving of certain, or in the, how can I call it?
Oops. Our signal is disappearing. I'm going to move over back to Kirsten. Kirsten, would you like to give us a 30-second response on that question I posed to you, please? No, we seem to have an internet connectivity problem. Okay, no problem. May I look around at the floor whether we have... I don't know whether anybody can do lip reading, but I'm not that good with lip reading, so unfortunately not. Okay, thank you, Walter. I've got your answer. So in a nutshell, yes, it is something we should dream for. There might be a couple of hurdles. There's nothing that you and myself and our industry cannot tackle to try and achieve. So I would like to look around the floor and see if there are any questions that anybody would like to pose to Walter about the containers and including the PCR material in new containers. This idea of having a single tone or a single pigment type of container. Les, question for us, please.
Thanks, Gerhard. Good afternoon, everyone. And hello, Walter. Within the world today, the one country that's recycling containers completely, you call it PCR, Walter, and I think he knows this, is Brazil. First of all, their collection, because it's mandatory, is huge. But what they found when they started using that plastic to produce new containers is that they first used recycled plastic on the outside, recycled plastic on the inside, and virgin plastic in the middle. And of course, this added to costs, etc. And then they decided they went for a two-layer, as Walter will remember from meeting these people. And the virgin plastic had to be used on the inside because the multinational companies that were going to be using these drums were, let's put it this way, they were a little bit afraid that recycled plastic may interfere with the, I'm going to say, the sensitive new molecules. So you had to have, or they believe, you had to have a layer of virgin material on the inside. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Les. The one thing I can assure you, in terms of the new IPAC Chem drum, they are doing a multiple layer with virgin to exactly produce that quality of container that's required by the multinational and by the local market. But the company has the ability to do in-line fluorination, which is that coating you put on the inside of the container to protect the plastic against any attack by the chemicals in the container. So as time progresses, that technology will be improved, will be expanded, and I'm quite sure in a couple of years we might end up with a total PCR container with a proper fluorination lining that will be acceptable to market and affordable in the market. I wonder if there's anybody else with a question. Otherwise, I would like to move on to Mishelle, because that is, I think, the crunch of this afternoon's session. Anybody else? Okay. Is Kirsten back online? Kirsten, can you hear us? Would you like to respond if your voice is not down? No. Okay, sorry, Kirsten, we can't hear you. So we will have to do a bit of telephonic conversation after the time. Thank you very much for your participation anyway. We were very fortunate to, as they call, netted Mishelle Govender from Department of Environmental Affairs to come and talk to us this afternoon about the PCR principle, sorry, not the PR, EPR principle, Extended Producer Responsibility Principle, what it entails in terms of the broader recycling arena, and what does it mean for our industry, and what do we have to do as an industry to talk to this particular set of regulations and how to comply with it. So Mishelle, can I hand over to you? Thank you very much. It's also a pre-recorded presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is quite an honor to be asked to present on a topic that's quite close to my heart, extended producer responsibility. My name is Mishelle Govender. I am from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. I am the Chief Director responsible for hazardous waste management and licensing. As I indicated, extended producer responsibility is something that the department has been working on for a couple of years. And it gives me great pleasure to be at a position where we have implemented and we are extending this further than what currently exists. My invitation asked me to talk about what the pesticide industry really needs to do when it comes to extended producer responsibility. And I thought that in order for me to do this, I need to give an indication of what these regulations are about, what the responsibilities generally are, before I come to the pesticide industry in particular and indicate what specific areas we will be looking at. So at this stage, I want to then just give a very brief background. We commenced with the process to implement extended producer responsibility, or EPR, for the country in December 2019. We had extensive consultation that happened, which resulted in the EPR regulations as well as notices for electronic and electrical equipment, lighting, as well as paper and packaging sectors being implemented, or basically being published for implementation on the 5th of May 2021. Now, this just gives a background or an indication of the content of the regulations, which I will be going through in some detail a little later. Obviously, as any other regulation, we would need definitions. We'd need to indicate what the purpose of these regulations are. Who does the regulations apply to? What is the registration requirements of producers? What are the measures that we expect as a department needs to be implemented? What are the obligations on producers in this regard? What is the minimum criteria for an extended producer responsibility scheme to operate? Financial arrangements, monitoring, reporting, reviews, all as well as offences and penalties. These are things that I will be going to in a little bit more detail in my presentation. Right. Some of the definitions that we've coined in this regulation is brand owner, who is a person or category of persons who makes and or sells any identified product under a brand label. A free rider means a firm or individual who benefits from the actions or efforts from another in relation to an extended producer responsibility scheme without fully complying with the requirements. So benefit from the recycling, benefit from the material or the product not getting to landfill, but actually not putting in any contribution towards that. And we've tried in these regulations to then deal with free riders. An importer is a person or category of persons that brings in identified products or items that contain identified products into the country from abroad. And they could actually be people who actually place it on the market, or may not necessarily that item on the market first. It may go to a retailer, etc. So that's the definition of importer. Producer means a person who is engaged in the commercial manufacture of these products that have been identified in terms of Section 18 of the National Environmental Management Waste Act. So the producer will be identified in these Section 18 notices, and I'll come to that a little later in the presentation. Collection means the gathering of identified products at the end of their life cycle. So we're looking at post-consumer waste. And this product could be at its place of generation, or it could be in a storage area, etc. For example, when a waste picker picks up some of these materials or products, they take it to a storage facility before, or a storage area before it then is taken to a service provider for the actual recycling. Full costs, this is basically talking about the costs that are associated with EPR, and it means all the direct, fixed, and variable costs associated with the scheme. Identified products, this is in terms of the notices, which will be issued in terms of Section 18(1)(a). And net cost means the full cost. You subtract the revenue of the sales of the collected material, and that's what net cost actually means. Now, I'm going to go into the purpose of these regulations, and I think this is where my invitation comes into play, because I've been asked to talk on circularity, and part of the purpose of these regulations is firstly to provide a framework for the development, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of EPR schemes by producers. The second purpose is to ensure efficient and effective management of the identified product at the end of its life. And thirdly is to encourage and enable the implementation of circular economy initiatives. And I think that is extremely important, because the whole point of circular economy is to prevent a product from becoming waste and to actually add more years to it before it becomes waste. And sometimes it doesn't even get to waste. It gets recycled, it gets reused, it gets repurposed. And this is what we're looking at in terms of the EPR scheme. So it applies to identified products, as I indicated, and this will come in the form of a gazette. And later you will see how this applies to the pesticide industry. It applies also applies to identified products that were in the market, that were placed in the market prior to the regulations coming into effect. But these regulations do not apply to identified products that are intended for export only. So nothing that basically, if the product is not put into the South African market, it's only made for export purposes, then that does not fall within the scope of these regulations. The next part is talking about registration. So existing producers must have registered by the 5th of November 2021 for the products that have already been identified. Now, pesticides is not yet, and I'll come to that a little later when I focus purely on pesticides. But the products that we have identified as a department of being something that requires EPR is, like I indicated earlier, electrical and electronic equipment, packaging, as well as lighting equipment. Those are the three areas or the three product types where producers or PROs must have registered by the 5th of November 2021, so 6 months after the regulations came into effect. New producers or PROs, in terms of those three sectors that I talked about, or products, would have had 3 months, or still have 3 months time frame. So when they establish themselves, within 3 months of their establishment, they would have to register as a producer or PRO, and then implement or be part of an EPR scheme. Registration is via the South African Waste Information Center, and I put this here because I've tested it with some of the other product owners, and they've told me it takes 10 minutes, which is really good, because we don't want significant delays in this regard. Now we come to the important measures. What are those EPR measures that producers need to comply with or need to implement? Firstly, when a product or a class of products have been identified through the Section 18 notices, then the producer of that product must establish and implement an EPR scheme if they want to go it alone. They must join another extended producer responsibility scheme, or appoint a producer responsibility organization to establish and implement the scheme on their behalf. And what this entails is involvement of the entire value chain. So right through from producers all the way to retailers, to recyclers, refurbishers, etc. So we need the whole value chain involved in this process. And the producers must be accountable for the operation and performance of their scheme, and that is why targets are set. But that will be something I focus on a little later. In addition to those measures, they would have to conduct life cycle assessments for each identified product. And what we've done is we've delayed the implementation of life cycle assessments for 5 years. Based on the comments that did come from industry. But ultimately, what we want producers to focus on in that life cycle assessment is minimization of material used in the identified products. So we're looking at waste minimization. So when you design for maximum recyclability, you're minimizing the amount of material that actually ends up as waste. And that's what we want producers to think about and to start implementing. We want, and that's the second part of the second point rather, which talks about when that design happens for maximum recyclability, reuse, or recovery, it must not compromise the functionality of the product. That is not something that we're looking for. We're just looking for alternate designs that can actually result in less waste being generated at the end of the process. And what then happens is there is a reduction. There has to be a reduction of environmental toxicity in that post-consumer waste, so it makes it easier to deal with. I'm going to continue with measures. So what we want producers to do is we want producers to collaborate with the Department of Trade Industry and Competition rather. And we also want broad-based Black economic transformation within this sector. So we want a charter developed with targets, timeframes, and implementation measures. And this has also been delayed because we're saying within 2 years of publishing the notice, that charter must be formed and it must comply with Section 9.1 of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. And so basically we're saying as a country, our focus as a government it is a focus. Transformation is a huge agenda, and we want special focus on women, youth, and people living with disabilities to be included in this entire EPR scheme that is going to be implemented. We're specified, we want a mandatory take back on products at the end of their life cycles. And we also want environmental labels within a period of 3 years. So environmental labels tells you, for example, what is the product made of? Is it environmentally safe? Does it have toxins in it? Does it have POPs or persistent organic pesticides, et cetera, So we just need environmental labels to declare what type of product this is and what are the hazards related to this product. So if the product is non-toxic, then that actually is something that the consumer will look at and purchase these products, knowing that it's not going to have too much of an impact. These are obligations which may not necessarily apply to the pesticide sector, but as I indicated previously, producers can go on their own and develop a scheme and implement it. But when it comes to e-waste, lighting, and packaging, we have allowed for PROs or producer responsibility organizations to be formed because some of the producers have said they don't have the capacity to do it alone. And we have PROs that were established in the country for many, many decades. But basically, that producer responsibility organization will do this for the producer. And part of what they have to do then, the obligations, is they must develop and maintain a system to collect fees. They must maintain a register of its members, conduct internal and external financial audits, and submit these to the department. The external audit report will be uploaded onto SAWIC for public access. That is what the department will do. And what needs to happen is the PRO needs to collect information, manage the data, and submit this data onto SAWIC or the SAWIS, which is the information system. What we want PROs to do is also contract with downstream value chain members for services that are needed, and for that process to be transparent and fair. For producers that establish their own schemes, they will allocate funding for implementation of the scheme, and they will do the same, conduct internal and external financial audit reports and make that available, and they will also manage their data and make it available to the department. What we want producers to do is cooperate with all municipalities, where applicable. If a municipality is collecting the product, the identified product, liaise with them and come up with an agreement of how to use the municipality services where feasible to recover these identified products. Remember, I indicated earlier, informal waste pickers or waste collectors operate on a municipal space, and we need to integrate those informal waste pickers, reclaimers, into that post-consumer collection value chain, because they do add value and they divert a lot of waste away from municipal and other landfill sites. So they play a critical role, and their inclusion is something we want to continue. We want producers to develop and establish secondary markets for recycled content, so that we don't end up having a lot of material that is now extracted or from the product, but it hasn't got a market to go to. So we need producers to get involved in that to ensure that there isn't a huge amount of supply and no demand for the recycled content. We need that to happen. We need producers to utilize new and existing infrastructure. So not necessarily just start afresh. Use what is there. Do homework. Find out who's operating in that municipal space or in that local space and use them, because they are a valuable resource. We also want producers to compensate the informal sector for the service, the environmental service that they are performing. And this is something that we've delayed implementation, but we have identified or a target date of November 2022 for that to come into effect. And like I've indicated, we're looking for transformation across the sector. The EPR fee, we give an indication of how that could be worked out or calculated. It's based on the weight of the product. How easy is that product to recycle, which would bring down the EPR fee to a certain extent? What is the current demand for the material? What's happening in terms of collection, transport, and treatment? Are they separately collected? Are they part of the producer's collection? These fees can be used to implement or enhance that collection, transport, and treatment costs. There's admin costs, of course, and costs for public communication and awareness, which we need to do. There is the EPR fee could be used for litter reduction, separate collection for that, costs for appropriate surveillance to know whether improvements are being seen, which includes the auditing of this process. And of course, remember at the beginning I talked about net costs. So all of this, you subtract the revenues from the recycled material sales, and that's how you get the net cost for EPR. For a PRO established fee, the PRO will together with its members develop that fee, and it would apply proportionally based on the products that are placed on the market. And what we want as a department is that fee must be publicly available on a website, on a PRO website, so that the consumer also is aware of how this fee was calculated, what was taken into consideration, and they have a choice of whether to buy that product or not. This is what we're offering to the public. The admin cost of the EPR scheme, we have limited it. We have said that the admin cost must not focus on anything else other than salaries of the PRO staff, your overhead costs like your utilities and rent, and then of course your information system to ensure that you have data management. The admin costs are limited to 20% of the revenue collected in the first year, going down to 15% in the second year and 12% in the third year. The ultimate aim is that the admin costs must not be a consistent cost throughout the life cycle of the EPR scheme. It should reduce to a point where it's at its lowest, and these are the limits we have placed in the regulations itself. In a producer-established scheme, the producer must determine determine the funding that is required for the scheme to operate, and must ensure that there are resources made available to ensure that the scheme is then effective. So what we're also saying is that fee must be equal to the costs for establishing a collection system, plus collection, transport, and treatment costs, plus admin costs, plus cost for communication and awareness raising, plus cost of surveillance, less the revenues from the recycled sales. So I think we've just gone ahead and reiterated that. The latest fee must at all times be publicly available. I've indicated that. And they must have an annual financial plan, the PRO or producer established scheme, which indicates what money they have and what is their annual budget that they're going to be spending on the EPR scheme. So we want to know that as well. The annual financial plan must, as a minimum, have the EPR fee allocation, the manner in which it's calculated, and the total amount of contributions for this. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, we need interim performance reports, which is what the regulations indicate. And these interim reports will be measured against the individual targets, as well as the governance issues. And so the focus areas, rather, of the report would be unaudited interim performance against published targets, and unaudited breakdown of all the allocation in terms of the fee, as well as performance on the finance matters. So this is an interim report. So it's due to the department in July of every year, post the implementation of the scheme. And this is basically so that the department has a handle on what's working, what's not working, so that we can intervene and make necessary amendments where needed. We need annual performance audit reports, which must be submitted to the department 3 months post the conclusion of the year. So the calendar year ends in December. So the report must be with the department by the 31st of March. And that report must contain the following minimum requirements: performance against the published targets, the breakdown of the fee, performance on finance matters, governance report, and the number of jobs created. Excuse me. All producer responsibility organizations and producers who establish their own scheme must record and report on an annual basis to the SAWIS the quantities of the product that are placed on the market by members of the scheme, the product that is collected, what is diverted away from landfill, what is exported, what is landfilled, and what number of jobs are created. We, as a department, we've built into the regulations a performance review. And so that performance will be reviewed every 5 years post the implementation of the scheme. And the department may at any time review the scheme based on its performance, or the PROs or producers can actually approach the department and indicate that they want an earlier review of the scheme. Basically, it could be due to non-achievement, or it could be because there's overachievement of targets. So those are what we have built in. The criteria for a product or producer responsibility organization is that it must be an autonomous body, which is established by producers. through due process. It has to go through a process. It must be a registered not-for-profit company. It must be managed by a board of directors, and it must comprise representatives from the producers themselves. And it must adhere to the Companies Act in terms of good corporate governance and management of conflict of interest. The offenses, so there are numerous offenses. A person commits offense if that person fails to comply with registration. It is an offense if that person fails to provide a report to the department. It is an offense if the measures that we have, the criteria within the regulations, if they are not complied with, that is an offense. So all of this is basically everything that I've discussed over the last 10 minutes. And if that is not done by either a PRO or a producer, then it is an offense. And the next slide basically gives an indication of what the penalties are, and they're quite steep. So a person convicted of an offense is liable to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 15 years. So it's quite a huge sentence, and an appropriate fine, or both, a fine and imprisonment. And a registered producer who does not comply with these regulations may have their registration revoked, and they may be forced to join another extended producer responsibility scheme, or a registered PRO may have its registration revoked as well. So those are the penalties. Now, that basically covers generally what the regulations talk about. But let's now go into what I think all of you are interested in is, how does this affect the pesticides industry? So firstly, remember, there is no notice at this stage for the pesticides industry. This is what we have been working with Gerhard and Rod and the team from CropLife SA to ensure that what we put out there is accepted and is owned by the sector itself. And so we've already drafted a notice, and I'll go through some of the things that we're looking at in the notice. And I think we haven't published this for public comment, so you basically have an early indication of what's going to be there. And when this is published, you have that opportunity to comment and provide your input on what you think works, what doesn't work, what couldn't possibly work, what is going to be a challenge. But ultimately, we are going to publish a notice that is going to talk about pesticides themselves. So in the proposed notice at this stage, we've got a few definitions. I think the important ones are, what is an obsolete pesticide? What is a pesticide, in fact? And what's a co-formulant? What is a container? These are some of the things that we're focusing on within the notice. And we are, like I said, working very, very much hand in glove with CropLife SA to ensure that we've got the terminology and the definitions absolutely correct. The purpose would be for this particular notice would be for a producer or class of producers of a product to set up procedures, processes, and invest resources to implement EPR at a post-consumer stage. So this is linked to collection, storage, transportation of their products. It talks about recycling, recovery, and treatment. And you will notice that we have not made mention of a PRO in this space, because that is not what is happening out in the sector at the moment. So we've listened. The scope would be that this notice would apply to products and the resulting waste which arises from the use by a consumer or an end user of pesticides and its related containers. The products that we're looking at in these proposed notice would be pesticides, pesticide co-formulant, as well as the containers in which these products come in. As I indicated, who's going to be responsible for this scheme? It would be the producers of those items that do so. The targets, and I apologize, the figures are, the writing is very small, but ultimately we're looking at what I need you to just understand and look at this in your own time is what are the various products. It's obsolete pesticides. It could be high density polyethylene containers. It could be low density polyethylene containers, cardboard boxes, paper bags, whatever it is, glass bottles, aluminum canisters, steel drums, whatever pesticides come in, whatever form it is, those containers or receptacles is something that needs to be taken off from the intended disposal and reworked or treated rather, to ensure that the pesticides in it is not going to affect the environment, and then that would have to be dealt with. The next target, this is the target for collection. So it's looking at, for example, on high density polyethylene containers, we're looking at a target of 80% of the material put onto the market annually. That's just one example. So you will see there's 5 columns, the gray columns. It just basically indicates the targets per year of implementation of this scheme. And that, remember I said the scheme will operate for 5 years and then we'll review it to see what happens next. These are the targets on recycling. So similar thing, and apologies, the table did not want to cooperate with me. For example, HDP or high density polyethylene containers, we're looking at a target in the first year of 85% of collected materials being recycled. In the second year, 90%. In the third year, 90%. In the fourth year, 90%. And hopefully in the fifth year, 95% of that material would then be recycled. So this basically sets increasing targets based on what is happening and the available resources within the country to deal with these pesticides and pesticides containing containers. Thermal treatment is an option that exists, and it's one of those options that then deals with these pesticide containing material, so your containers, your cardboard boxes, because this cannot go into the environment, because then once it gets into water systems, then we're going to have issues. So thermal treatment is an option. I know there's only 2 facilities at the moment that really are geared for this within the country, with a few more that are being developed. And I know probably Gerhard will tell you about something new that's coming up in the Eastern Cape in this regard. Then in terms of obsolete pesticides, I've got a question mark in terms of pesticide thermal treatment, which is something that you would have to comment on when these notices are issued. But essentially, we're looking at targets in year 1 of 50%, the quantity, or rather 50 tons of this being disposed. And the reason I have a question mark there is my next slide, is something that we need to consider, and the industry itself needs to consider, is that we have a regulation currently within the department called the Waste Classification and Management Regulations. And what we have done in those regulations is we've restricted or prohibited the disposal of pesticide containing waste in the country. So disposal of pesticides or pesticide containing waste is not allowed in landfill sites. And these prohibitions came into effect as indicated there. So for POPs pesticides, it came into effect last year, the 23rd of August, but all other waste pesticides were not allowed into landfills from the 23rd of August 2017. So this in a nutshell is what we're looking at. We need the industry to consider what is being produced out there, who's importing it, who would be the producer in this case. So if you're importing it into the country, you're a producer. And if you're doing that, you have a responsibility to implement a scheme which then makes sure that all of these pesticides and pesticide containers are removed from the environment and effectively treated so that they do not impact on our soil structures, our water resources, our air in the country. So these are issues that will be looked at. These are the considerations that the industry need to make in order to ensure that you're ready for the notice when it gets published. And on that note, I would like to end by saying that we envisage that we would have in the next month, or at least in the next month, the notice for pesticides published for public comment. At the end of the public consultation process, we would consolidate those comments, revise the notice as and where it is needed. And by March 2023, we would envisage an implementation of this notice. So that pretty much gives the pesticides industry another 9 months or so, or maybe a year, let's just say a year, to get everything together so that when this is implemented, you hit the ground running, as it were, and there are no challenges. So I would like to invite the industry to comment on these as and when it comes up for discussion, and that would make it a set of notices or notice and regulations that are really owned by the industry, by the communities, and so there would be maximum compliance against or to it. I want to then thank you for your attention, and hopefully there are some questions. We are available as a department to answer these questions, and thank you really again once more for the opportunity of addressing you on this very, very important subject. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mishelle. It was pretty quite a revelation, I think, for most of us. I think I'm well versed on what you said there today. The big question before I open the floor for any other questions is, what is the current status of the draft regulations? When do we see it?
Well, Gerhard, as I indicated to you earlier offline, the norms, or rather the notices, were signed by the minister, so she approved it today. So we are hoping to have this gazetted in the Friday Gazette that goes out. So it is imminent. It is here. I know we've waited a long time. We've worked a long time on it. So I'm very excited when I got that notification, so I could come and indicate to you as well that this is here now, and we're hoping for maximum compliance. I'm very, very excited.
Thank you very much. I hear that excitement. It's like a little birthday cake with 20 candles all lit up. It sounds wonderful to me, because that's the one tool that we will use within CropLife SA to start really going ballistic on container management, and then also start looking towards what do we do with optic pesticides. So we're very pleased, and I think from our side, thank you to you and your staff, to Sharon in particular, for all the open communication, the fairness in your communication with us, and taking your hands and taking this process forward. I wonder if our members have any questions for Mishelle. Because I've got so many questions, but I wouldn't like to steal the floor here. Yes, there's a question there.
My question is regarding the definition of who the producer is. Does this apply to producers who are not engaged in importation of products in country? Perhaps is the first question. And a follow-up to that is, you might have actual manufacturers but not manufactured in South Africa, for instance, but they are actively involved in the marketing of the product and may or may have legal entities in the country. So just for clarity, thank you.
Shall I?
Yes, you can respond.
Thanks for that question. And so there's two parts to that question. So the first one is, if there is somebody manufacturing the pesticide, let's say let's say India, and they have agents based in the country that bring that product over, then that agent is defined as a producer, the way we've defined it in the regulations. So when you are defined as a producer, you already have an obligation to comply with the regulations and the notices. The second part is, if you're a manufacturer of that product within the local space, you are also defined as a producer. So I hope that's clear. So if you're making the product here in the country, you're a producer. If you're bringing it from another country, whoever's bringing it, whoever is importing it into the country, that person or organization is defined as a producer. Clear? Good.
Any Fani questions from your side, please?
Regarding what is considered product, I think we still confronted with growers who actually consider the can that the product comes in as our industry's property. Somehow, and we must deal with it. And maybe the question is to both of you, Gerhard and Mishelle, is there enough communication through to end user level to ensure that also the responsibility lies with the owner of the product right to the very end, and not just the manufacturer?
So this is the little bit of a change in tact, as it were, in terms of government. So the focus, Fani, on these regulations is actually the manufacturer. It's actually the producer. So if you put something on the market, you must put measures in place as a producer that when that product is used by the farmer, that there is a take-back system, or there's a way in which that goes back to the producers, and the producer then has that EPR fee, which is dedicated towards recycling and recovery. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you are right. We need as much advocacy around this as possible, because people need to be made aware of what is happening, and they need to understand how they fit into this. The presentation was long, but I think when you read it and you get to grips with it, you will see that we've tried to include the retailers. You've tried to include Joe Public, basically saying, you too have a responsibility. You too must make sure that you don't throw this in the bin, that you keep it, and find out from your co-ops in the areas, where does it go to? And the co-ops must then liaise with CropLife SA, must liaise with the producers to make areas available, so that this doesn't just get dumped or buried on farming areas. But we have a long way to go in terms of advocacy. We really need to create more awareness so that everybody from the producers right down to Joe Public know this is my responsibility in terms of the regulations and in terms of the notices themselves. So we're really pushing for that.
Dr. Mkhize.
A question that I have, on the regulations, you actually have a point where you say that if people don't comply, there will be, imprisonment. As far as I know, now not everyone has actually met the deadline of 5th of November. How is that being handled by the department? And is there anyone already in prison?
Not yet. We're getting there. But so we must also remember these are brand new sets of regulations, because it's predominantly been voluntarily done in the country. And so we have a long way to go. But we already have offenders, and we've already got letters written, enforcement letters written to those facilities saying, we don't actually want to take you to court. We don't want to waste taxpayers' money. So can you please comply? So we're going with that approach first. And if you don't comply, we will then take you to court. We will then prosecute you and we'll make an example because we need compliance. Gerhard and I were talking as well. And you also have a responsibility. So if you know of somebody who is willfully ignoring these regulations, we've got a toll-free number at the department, but we also have contact details of all of my team that work on EPR, and we will then make sure that the green scorpions get onto it. We're looking forward to that, but we want compliance first. That's a last resort, but when our hand is pushed, we will then not be afraid to move in that direction.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. My question is on those waste management contractors that get government contracts or private sector contracts to manage waste. Some of them, they do manage pesticide waste, but we know that there are stories where they don't do what they said they'll do with that waste. They probably dump it elsewhere. There are a lot of illegal dumping of waste in South Africa. So in that case, then who is liable? Because I'm thinking, let's say as a producer, you hired somebody to actually be managing your waste, but then they decide to do illegal things and dump it elsewhere. But you've already paid them a fee to do that. So how is that going to be handled?
Good question. And I think this is why we wrote the regulations the way we did. Producers need to make sure they follow up and they understand what their recyclers are doing. So because of the enormity of the responsibility that falls on producers must be absolutely certain that the recycling is actually happening. If the recycling is not happening and you contract with that recycler to deal with your product and we find it in a river or in a gully, we will come after the producer. We will obviously take on the recycler as well, but the producer needs to be oversight done. There needs to be monitoring done on the recyclers that exist so that you're getting value for your money, and this is not just some fly-by-night company that's throwing away these pesticides and then impacting on people and the environment. So that's built in.
Thank you, Mishelle. Thanks for those good answers. We've come to the end of this particular presentation and the questions and answers. I can just tell you that the recycling network that we have in CropLife SA, which is sitting at about 139 companies, and about 240 individuals now, we've all vetted them. And we have cancelled certification of some companies, not that we pay them, not that they owe us anything, but if they don't abide by the current regulations and by our standards in CropLife SA, we do not certify them. And they rapidly lose their market share against other people that are certified and act within the confines of the Act and our own set of standards in CropLife SA. So coming back again, that that's the ethical thing to do. And the ethics will eventually override the compliance issues. Roddy, have you got one last small question?
I do have one last question. Sorry, if I could get the mic. Mishelle, we've had, as we've gone out to our members and told them about the EPR and our EXCO has agreed that we will offer our members a PRO, the producers who are interested. We've had some people coming back and saying some of their other packaging suppliers are automatically charging a levy on their invoices. Now, our understanding is, and from what you said today, it's actually voluntary. If you want to participate in a PRO, you have the option of either setting up your own or participating in a PRO. Is it right then that some suppliers of packaging material are already automatically charging a levy without giving people the option of opting in? We don't believe that's right, so we just wanted to know what your opinion is when that's happening so we can give feedback to our members. Thank you.
So, Rod, I think there's something not quite right there. So we'll have a long conversation afterwards. But just off the top of my head, maybe just a little bit of clarity. If your product has been identified in terms of the notices already published, you don't have an option. You have to register, and you have to make sure that your product is dealt with in an environmentally responsible manner through recycling. Now, how you do that are the two ways that I talked about. One, you as a producer, you do it yourself. You get your fees, you allocate resources, and you get it to the recycling facilities. However, if you opt to go the route of the PRO, it's not a voluntary thing. It's giving you options. You either go it alone or you go with a PRO. And if you choose a PRO, then the PRO is going to charge you a fee for that service they are providing. So that's why I'm saying something doesn't sound quite right, and the regulations are very clear on that.
That's how I understand the regulation being very clear too. So to be a bit more specific, it's our members who are buying empty containers to put their product in, and the supplier of those containers is automatically charging. They weren't asked if they wanted to participate. It just automatically appears on an invoice. We don't think that's right. So the guidance we've given so far to our members is you need to go back and say, sorry, our interpretation of the EPR is that you need to give me the option of doing it myself or participating with you. No one has been given, those people who've reported it haven't been given the choice. The supplier of those empty containers is automatically invoicing them. So are we correct in the advice we're giving to our members is that they must challenge that supplier and say, you haven't really asked me if I want to be part of your PRO, you've just assumed it and you're automatically charging me. Are we correct with that interpretation?
You are correct, and I would go one further.
Yep.
Please report that to the department, because we want to squash any practice out there that does not align with the regulations.
Awesome.
And we want it to be fair. People must have a choice, which is why we didn't just say there'll be one PRO, multiple, and you have a choice.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mishelle. Thanks, Rod. Thanks, everybody, for contributing. So our last presentation today is from the heart. Koot Human, who established DromMonster, it must be 20 years ago. He was one of the first people we certified in the CropLife SA network of recyclers. He's been a very staunch supporter. He's learned the hard lessons. He's paid the school fees for going into this. And we have Koot not online today because he told me he's completely shy of any audiences or any public presentation, but he's done a really heartfelt presentation to us today in Afrikaans on the challenges faced by a recycler, the person who collects and puts it into a machine to shred it up to go to market.
DromMonster begin met 'n onmiddellike uitgawe. Die dromverwydering, die trok self, slytasie, diesel, drywer met sy 2 personeel wat laai, die haaglike toestand van ons paaie, hy's 'n baie hoë tol. Goeie voorbeeld, verlede week het ek op 1 trok, op 1 verwydering, 3 bande en 3 rims verloor. Ons verloor weekliks bande, wat 'n reuse uitgawe is. Toestand op die plaas is ook nie altyd goed nie. Ons trok het al rekmerke soos wat hulle uitgesleep word. Volgende groot uitgawe is by ons fabriek. Ons het 'n klomp personeel, werkers wat aflaai. Die drom moet weergespoel word. Die plakker moet afgetrek word. Die drom moet gesaag word, gegranulate word. En dan na 'n washplant en dan na 'n extruder. En natuurlik kom dit met 'n helse kragrekening. Ons het ook 'n werkswinkel met 'n permanente motorwerktuigkundige, wat gelukkig is as hy 1 dag in 'n 7-dag week af het. Van die 6 trokke wat ons het, is ons bevoorreg as 4 van hulle verwydering 'n dag kan doen. 'n ander groot probleem is wat ons noem die drompouchers, die fly-by-nights, die hand-to-mouth oukies. Hulle neek die hele mark op en kom weg daarmee. Ons stuur byvoorbeeld 'n trok honderde kilometer ver om 'n verwydering te doen met 'n afspraak. En as die trok daar kom, is die dromme reeds deur 'n poucher opgetel en hy het sommer die boer daarvoor betaal. Hulle skep 'n mark wat glad nie volhoubaar is nie, want daar is nie voldoende fondse in hierdie mark om boere nog te vergoed vir die dromme nie. Let wel, ons diens is gratis, so ons kan nie sulke finansiële probleme bekostig nie. Dan ook is daar 'n maatskappy wat hulle geregistreer het as DromMonster RSA. Hulle gee hulle self voor as ons maatskappy, waar talle boere al teespoed opgetel het met hulle Zero Gap audits. Hierdie ouens het geen akkreditasie nie. En ons kon met CropLife se hulp hulle nog nooit vastrek nie. Die groenskerpioene sal hier definitief moet inklim. DromMonster is al 14 jaar met die dromverwyderingsprogram besig. Hierdie was beslis nie 'n maklike leerskool nie, en is beslis nog nie 'n maklike besigheid om te bedryf nie. Omdat ons so bitter baie uitgawes het, en net sente maak op 'n drom, is dit regtig nie winsgewend nie. Ons sal graag wil sien dat op 'n manier, dat ons 'n rebate kan inwerk, van die verskaffer se kant af. 'n goeie voorbeeld is, die verskaffer laai 3000 dromme af, teen 'n 10 miljoen rand se rekening. As ons byvoorbeeld net R1 op 'n drom kan kry van die verskaffer se kant af, het sy aan die boer se rekening of van die verskaffer af, sal geen entiteit eers dit voel nie. Die chemiese agente moet die boer laat verstaan dat die drom nie die boer se eiendom is nie, en dat dit moet verwyder word vir herwinning. Hulle moet ook boere bewus maak om hulle dromme te spoel, soos hulle die chemikalie in hulle spuite gooi. Hoogloopspuite het almal klare rinser in, waar die chemikalie trek tot in die tank. En so spaar die boer klaar R1000. Hoekom moet ons vir 'n checkersakkie betaal, wat baie minder skade aan die omgewing doen, as 'n chemiese drom? Die volgende punt waaroor ons al vir jare lank kla, is pethouers. En die houers wat glad nie herwinbaar is nie. Die verskaffer sal dadelik aandag moet gee daaraan, sodat alle houers HDPE houers is. Hulle skep vir ons 'n groot uitgawe om dromme op te tel, wat ons nie kan gebruik nie, en wat ook nie herwinbaar is nie. Ons sal graag ook wil hê dat hulle moet kyk na 'n manier hoe ons die plakkers makliker kan verwyder, want hierdie proses is tydrowend. Dan nog 'n punt wat wel werk en waarop ons baie goeie samewerking kry, is die produsente wat uitvoer. Hierdie boer het 'n verwyderingssertifikaat nodig om sy produkte kan uitvoer, of van Woolworths ensovoorts te kan lewer. So, ek stel voor dat alle boere 'n verwyderingssertifikaat moet hê om sy produkte kan lewer. Maak nie saak waarmee hy boer en aan wie hy lewer nie. Dit sal die herwinningsprogram dadelik op die map sit. Ek voel dis baie belangrik. Hoekom geld hierdie wet net vir die uitvoerboere? So sal ons die drompouchers ook beter kan hanteer. DromMonster het deur die jare op sy eie onkoste al talle hokke op verskillende provinsies en areas opgesit, om dit vir die boer makliker te maak. En steeds kry ons geen samewerking. Dan wil ek graag afsluit met hierdie vraag. Hoe gaan die regering en die verskaffer ons kan help om ons wetgehoorsame verwyderaars met die nodige lisensie en wat deel is van die CropLife program, hoe gaan hulle ons help om die onwettige poachers van ontslae te raak? Dis hoekom ek voorstel dat ons die vorige punt implementeer. Ons wil ook maar net te bestaan maak. Ons het 'n liefde vir ons aarde, en ons glo dat herwinning 'n baie goeie ding is. Baie dankie.
in the Koot's absence, I think I owe him an apology and an applause for being so resilient through all the hurdles over the years and doing a fantastic job. He's one of the people that's been hanging in with us, collecting literally hundreds of tons of plastic per year and supplying back into market. So thank you to Koot in your absence. Two things are important for you to take home today as suppliers into the market. The PET containers are an issue. We have to sort them out. And I would like you to consider rapidly, whether you're multinational or local, to get rid of PET containers and to go for the high quality HTP containers, either with fluorination or a heavy gauge that do not panel. Because we can't tolerate PET containers long in the country. So by the end of 2022, I would like to see that we have no PET containers. The other thing that was mentioned this morning, I think, or this afternoon by, I think it might have been Kirsten also, that we look at a new way of attaching the label to the container because that water-insoluble glue is a big problem for us. So it doesn't have to happen now. We've got an EPR coming towards us now, a notice to us. We've got targets set. If we can move towards, let's say, 3 or 4 years from now to have water-soluble glues on our labels for the packaging, it'll be a dream because it makes it easy to remove for the farmer and for the recycler. So these things I want you to take home with you and start implementing that. Our last contribution this afternoon, before we go into the wrap-up session, is a short video that was produced by Brand Republic on commission from CropLife SA about the recycling of our empty packaging in the country. And I'm not going to say much more about this. This is our Hollywood event for our CropCon. And I'm going to stop talking now and let's watch the video and take it home with you and make it part of your life. Well, CropLife Africa in 2008 was part of a big program with the government, which was called the African Stockpile Program, in which we recovered quite a large quantity of old pesticides from the Limpopo province. But in the process of talking to farmers and to government institutions, we realized that there were literally thousands upon thousands of empty containers, unrinsed, lying around the farms, that we were sitting with a human catastrophe, an environmental catastrophe, because the burning and the bedding and the unrinsed containers were definitely posing a risk to human health and environment. So I went to the South African Plastics Industry Association, which is called Plastics SA, and they guided me to talk to people that were already in the recycling business of bringing plastics in from refuse dumps and whatever. And we started handpicking a couple of individual operators like, for example, Dealco and like MyPlas.
MyPlas het begin in 2012. Ons het 'n mandaat gehad vir die landbouindustrie. Dit was hoofsaaklik ons teikenindustrie. Ons het landbouafval soos besproeiingspype, die landbouchemiese houers en verpakkingskratte het ons mee begin as roumateriale.
Ek het so 21 jaar terug betrokke geraak. Ek het swart besproeiingspyp uit die landbousektor begin verwyder. En die leë chemiese houers het begin 'n probleem raak as gevolg van die proses waar dit moet voorbereid wees voor die ouens by herwinning dit wil aanvaar. En ek het op daai jare het ons met die leehouer vereniging begin en so het ons deur die jare dit opgebou waar ons vandag is. CropLife het gehelp dat ons sertifisering in plek kry waar die mense wat met uitvoer betrokke is, hulle papierwerk kan regkry. En die proses het baie goed gevorder. Die boere val baie mooi in met die proses.
Want dit is vir ons 'n baie groot voorreg om deel te kan wees van die CropLife leehouer bestuursprogram. Met die een rede is, ek meen dit gaan oor om ons aarde te beskerm en ons natuur te beskerm. Die goed word verwyder van die plaas af. Ek hoef dit nie in 'n grond te begrawe of te brand wat nadelig is vir die natuur en vir ons aarde nie. So dit help my bitter baie om deel van hulle te kan wees sodat die goed kan verwyder word en ek kan my plaas beskerm, ek kan my mense beskerm en ek kan die natuur beskerm.
Our standard is very often much higher than that what the national regulatory framework dictate to us. And our principle was that we want the drums to be totally clean. They must be put into secure, lockable storage spaces and then going off to processes where they're being processed into other commodities
Ek maak kontak met die boere vooraf en ons reël 'n spesifieke opteltyd. Die boere besproeiing oor sekere gebiede wissel. Baie van die vrugtebedryf en die koringbedryf is verskillende tye, so ons is die hele jaar besig om chemiese houers te verwyder.
Terwyl hy spuit die dag word die kan dit as dit leeg is, word hulle 3 keer gespoel voor hulle weer teruggaan in die container in en dan word dit die aand afgevoer plaas toe weer. En dan word dit in 'n aparte kamertjie vol gate gesteek, sodat daar nie weer middels in die kanne kan gevoeg word nie.
Ons kom uit met 'n voertuig na die perseel toe, waar hulle in 'n chemiese kamer wat toegesluit is, die kanne wat leeg is en reg voorberei is vir ons het. Die kanne word uitgepak. Ons stel die kanne, 'n papierwerk word uitgemaak vir die hoeveelheid kanne vir daai plaas wat opgelaai word en dan word die voertuig gelaai. En ons neem daai goed dan na herwinningsaanlegte toe wat gesertifiseer is by die Plastiese Federasie, wat dan weer die produk verder verwerk in 'n plastiekformaat in.
So wanneer die materiaal by ons aankom, het ons kwaliteitskontrole om te seker te maak dat die materiaal nie gemeng is nie of dat die regte standaarde voldoen. Dit gaan na 'n maalproses waar ons dit dan sal maal in vlokkies van 10 tot 14 mm. Van daar af gaan dit in 'n wasaanleg in wat ons net skoon water gebruik en van daar af sal dit dan in 'n extrusion proses, soos ons dit noem, waar die materiaal gesmelt word en dit word in 3 mm pilletjies gesny en van daar af sal ons kwaliteitsbeheer doen, vloeibaarheidstoetse om te sien of dit aan ons kliënt se vereistes voldoen voordat dit uitgestuur word.
Triple rinsing is your guarantee to have a totally clean container. You remove 99.997% of that chemical. There's no more risk. There's no more hazard linked to the container. When you get to the point where you get the little plastic pellets, that pellet is technically 100% clean. There's no pesticide residue in that. And you can make a totally palatable thing out of it for people. It's important for all the role players in the value chain of a pesticide container to be involved in the process. If you look at the world currently, we're sitting with this mass of humanity of nearly 9 billion people. The pollution footprint is immense and the plastic pollution footprint is horrifying in the world. We see plastics ending up in the ocean, killing dolphins and whales and turtles and fish and seabirds. Our job as an agricultural sector is to make sure every piece of plastic on every farm in the country is coming back into recycling and used to make a new plastic commodity. What CropLife always says, why do we do recycling? Simply because it is the right thing to do. We don't compel anybody. We don't say to anybody it's because the law says you must do it. Just recycle because it is the right thing to do. Don't you think that deserves an Oscar? Well, thanks to El Riza for organizing this. Thanks for Brand Republic, for Walter, the farmer, and for Dani to agree to be part of a video. It's going to go out on YouTube this afternoon, and please get it, send it. It must become the gospel for the industry to make sure every container comes off every farmer back into recycling. Thank you very much for the session, Mishelle. Thanks for all your kind words towards us. Thank you for all the support, and thank you all the members for participating. So we're going to move on now to our wrap-up session. Mishelle, you're welcome to stay on that important chair, or you're welcome to join the audience. I'm going to call on our industry leaders now to give us each a 5-minute wrap-up on the sessions we had during our CropCon 2022. And I'm going to start calling up on Quentin Cross, who's our current president of CropLife SA, to do the wrap-up for us on the international market forces, which was our first session of yesterday morning. At the podium, please, Quentin.
Good afternoon, everybody. There we go. So, thanks, Rod and team, for a great conference. I think you've set the standard quite high, so well done. Secondly, just as a background to me, 2 years as the president of CropLife, and that I'll continue to do for one more day. And then we'll have the successor taking over, and I wish him or her all the best going forward. So international market forces. For me, I think this was a good introduction, and it set the foundation for the last 2 days. I found it extremely interesting in that regard. So now we can put up the presentation so I could give a summary. Marcel, I'm going to take as long as I can because I know you've got a flight to catch, so I'll have to do yours too if I take too long. All righty. So the main takeaways, 49%, I found it very interesting that 49% of our exports are, or 49% of our produce is export bound. So bottom line to this is we cannot ignore the impact of what the global marketplace is telling us. Ignore it at your peril. That to me was quite profound. Thank you. Thanks a lot. There we go. Come back. Forward. The big one. The big one. That's pressing the wrong button. Need a degree. Okay. I think we then moved into the EU Green Deal, and this has been a big deal for quite some time now, actually, a raging debate. And again, the goals that are set for reducing chemical usage, although it's not legislated, I think it's going to gain momentum. It just simply has to. Consumers are playing too much of a role in what we do globally in terms of climate change and environmental responsibilities. My one opinion I have is the export crops are most affected at this moment. But it's a matter of time before all crops are going to have to participate in this whole compliance environment, whether they like it or not. So ignore it at your peril. Having been introduced to that, the identified challenges, well, I think the reduced chemical usage or options seems to be the biggest touch point for most of the farmers. Whenever I go around, and anybody else that discusses it with me, that seems to be the biggest concern. The Green Deal also seems to be prescriptive and not descriptive. So a lot of what we want to do, but not a lot of how we're going to do it. And I think this is where we as industry members and CropLife itself and associated industries need to play a greater role in lobbying that process to get a better understanding. And of course, it then introduces the concern we have in Africa about the mass economic and socio-economic challenges. They cannot be ignored. Food security is a real problem in Africa, may not be that much of a problem in other countries. And so that needs to be considered. The other challenge is if we're going to move towards the Green Deal or compliance in that regard, we're going to have to up our game on R&D. And I think it was pointed out that we lag quite significantly behind in terms of that R&D. Question is, are you being rewarded for it? Right through the supply chain, all the way through to the users in these foreign countries. So, yeah, and then needless to say, whenever you have changing legislation globally, if you lag behind in terms of your own regulatory bodies in your own country, this presents a serious problem, and I probably don't need to say much more about that. I think it's been spoken about at length, but something needs to be done. And I know as a CropLife organization, we've really pushed this very hard, this agenda hard, and sometimes you hit a brick wall. And boer maak 'n plan. We're going to carry on doing this. We're going to come up with these solutions, and we're going to win this battle. May it be in my lifetime. All right, opportunities, commercialized innovation. And I know the word was emphasized on commercialized because it doesn't help to have these wonderful innovations and everything for everybody and create all the confusion around that. But certainly we've got to look at the commercialized opportunities, and not necessarily all of them will be monetized. It's got to be a collective collaboration to bring about these. And we can do this through digital data. We can do it through mechanical options, the IPM. Marcel, you're going to talk about that, if I don't take much longer. Emerging smallholder farmers can play a significant role in this whole innovation process as we move towards this environmental responsibility. The culture, Gerhard, you spoke about that, and then the multi-stakeholder collaboration. We can't operate in silos in this whole process. Suppliers, distributors, the farmers, R&D organizations, and of course institutions such as CropLife need to collaborate to come up with the solutions. This next point I think I found very interesting relative to the discussions that I've had today. This presents a wonderful opportunity for those that are not adding value in the supply chain to step up, because innovating around the whole Green Deal and this move towards biological, etc., is complex. I think we've said it's unique to species, but it's also unique to each farm. And each farm has its own complex set of problems. And if we're looking at an overall solution, a holistic solution, then I think there's an opportunity for that crop advisor to get involved and up their knowledge and experience and expertise in that regard. And then, I think the approach about taking a proactive approach to the green deals before it's legislative, I think the EPR is setting the standard, Gerhard. Let's get in before we're forced through legislation. And finally, the question of lobbying stakeholders. And this is going to be lobbying for a dysfunctional registrar or regulatory body. And this is also lobbying for more understanding of the Africa challenges that we've got. And it's easy to say it, it's a lot harder to execute. And this is where we're all going to put our heads together to try and come up with it. Thank you very much. I hope that gives a summary of the first session adequately.
Thank you very much, Quentin. That was a very nice and strong message to our members. Our second speaker will be Ben Kroch. He's the commercial lead for Anlamat Madumbi. He will summarize the second session for us. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, everyone. I'd just like to thank you for Chris and Fani and Bertus for their input on this summary. Just on the main takeaways, we celebrate 75 years of the Act 36 of 1947 this year, and we've agreed upon that it's still a very good Act. There's a big difference between the compliance, you have to comply, it's non-negotiable, and versus stewardship. We want to comply, and as an ethos, it comes within. It's a foundation for integrity. And then we have to live stewardship, the life cycle approach. It is the right thing to do. I think we've discussed that in length. We feel that there's no need for the government regulation of the crop protection stewardship as such. We'll come to that point a little bit later. There's a growing compliance requirements for export producers, growers face to maintain market access. And then crop advisors, we feel that they are the contact point or the representatives of the registration holders, and they have to be properly trained and be professional experts in their specific fields. The few challenges identified, the backlog of outstanding registrations at the registrar office remains a massive hurdle, not only to the crop protection industry, but also for the growers, producers to stay competitive in the international market. That came from Fani. The label instructions, deviations still cause problems. The regular updates of regulations, and I think we've seen it in this session, of Act 36 of 1947, addressing the latest innovation and developments in the local and international agricultural unit, is very important. The changes in agricultural practices, example, the nets on orchard crops came out very strongly, the effects of pests and diseases and their behavior, efficacy of crop protection solutions. The residue management is not only critical to any export grower or producer, but becoming a greater challenge to maintain market access. And then that important question of Fani, who is the registration holder? I think there's some opportunities to address that. And then just on the opportunities, the transparent communication campaign, advocating broader stewardship principles through the entire value chain, from the registration holder to the consumer, the cradle to grave concept, a direct communication channel. I think you must investigate it. And then the ongoing awareness that crop protection products are not gif, or the old term of gifsmose. It actually remains a good stewardship message opportunity. More research to be done by registration holders on crop protection molecules, behavior in new agricultural change in practices. This IP must be able to be protected, and that came from Inc. And the basic crop protection product stewardship principles need to be included in the new regulations of the Act of 1947. And that's bringing me to the first point. It's not been regulated, but at least that basic principles of stewardship needs to be included in the regulations, the new regulations of Act 36 of 1947. And then the ongoing training and responsible use of agricultural remedies stays paramount. And then from CropLife members, more CropLife members have to get on board. We need more active participation and involvement from our member companies. Thank you, Gerhard.
Thank you, Ben. Folks, that's from the horse's mouth. Take it home. Make it part of your life. Our next, now we seem to be playing musical chairs. Is it going to be Marcel presenting, or is it going to be, okay, Marcel is going to be presenting, and then after him, Chris. So Marcel will be tackling the IPM session, and then after him, Chris will tackle the stewardship compliance section in terms of crop advisors. I'm running out for a second.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was asked to summarize integrated pest management, and I've got to look there to see my crib notes, so apologies if I stand on the side. The session was started by Andrew Bennett and basically explaining us the history of IPM and the change of view from total pest control to pest management by using a variety of solutions when an economic threshold is reached. This is when the economic benefits is greater than the cost. The solution can be either preventative or curative. And obviously, you know, there's a lot of solutions in IPM, but the ones that was relative to us, so we focused on chemistry, and it was asked by the IREC, HRAC, and FRAC teams to present what they are doing. And these teams focus on the prolonging of chemical effectiveness by focusing on resistance management. And this is part of our industry, and there's a lot of people that's in the audience that actually participates in these forums. There was also a discussion that was had on plant biotechnology as part of an IPM toolkit. So there are different ones. We've focused on BT seeds, herbicide-tolerant technologies, and environmental stress resistance genes. So that's more for the seed producers, and as also a part of a tool in the IPM strategy. Lastly, the biosolutions are a combination of multiple solutions that include biostimulants, biofertilizers, and biologicals that can be very species-specific, but is an excellent tool and a focus area within our industry. If we look at the identified challenges that was mentioned, it is in IPM it's quite difficult to determine the economic threshold because it changes from year to year, and different factors play a role in setting the so-called economic threshold. The HRAC requested participation from the audience, and FRAC requested that companies share their resistance data so that they can make better decisions and follow-ups. A general call on the industry to work together and to resolve the resistance challenges that we face within our industry. The plant biotechnology group is basically said that they're not a standalone solution and must be part of a whole program. And one of the challenges is obviously they need a refuge crop to delay resistance that must be close to the fields that use this technology. And biologicals is one of the factors. We need to have realistic expectations because you cannot have a direct comparison, and you need to make sure that your biologicals is part of a program and not a standalone solutions. On the opportunities that was mentioned is that we need the future is to move from IPM to this agroecological crop protection way of thinking, and the main focus is to focus more on preventative options than curative options. So it is a completely way to prevent that we create a crisis and even a threshold. It was also mentioned that there's definite focus to or an opportunity to train our farmers more on IPM, that they don't necessarily must go only for the chemical solution, but also consider other solutions within our options. IRAC, one of their great opportunities is the new classifications of the nematicides, to make sure that we manage them better and to prevent resistance. And the HRAC, they bragged about their following invasive weeds, the fact that they develop resistance guidelines in a very short space of time, then followed by a pamphlet. And then the last statement that include on the biological option, that firstly, if you've got realistic expectations and you make sure of the cumulative or the compounded effect of multiple actions actually makes a project effective or a program effective. So it's not a standalone solution, but if you use a lot of tools together, you can reach, I think the number was given up to 97% control that was given. I hope that is a short summary.
Welcome, Chris. You have been introduced.
Do I have to make it work, or does it work? Okay.
Yeah.
Presume it's that one. That's not mine. Ek sal like om daai ene te gee, maar is nie myne nie. Elrisa, have you got my one?
Yeah, they're sorting about my
Let's try that one. That looks better. Righto. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity. I think I have the advantage of giving a summary of a very lively session. And my takeaways, I hope to make as interesting as well. Some of the keywords that came out of that talk were that they expect our crop advisors to be experts. Trust was mentioned. Affiliated to CropLife. Hold our hands. Responsibility is important. Solution providers. Value adders or not. And then we had the parable from Gideon of the paracats. And what are the possible impacts of doing things wrong? And I think I made the point in that session that there are crop advisors and there are crop advisors. And there are agronomists, Peter, with respect, and to your son. And there are agronomists and there are consultants and there are consultants. And please choose wisely. Ask your crop advisor if he's accredited. Ask for his CropLife card. And demand the service that he should be providing you. A lot of these questions came up in each of the presentations that were given by the farmers on the panel. Monitoring and scouting programs, resistance management that should be incorporated into those programs, container management, the session we've just had, MRL management, even managing farms. Some of our crop advisors, when farmers go on holiday 3 weeks over Christmas time, they ask our guys to look after the farm, and they do it. It's a hell of a responsibility, but there are people who do it. So there are crop advisors out there who do the job, and the man behind the can, or behind the can, the man agter die kan, I don't see that as a derogatory term at all. We talk about it at Loaf of Agrichem quite proudly, our man agter die kan. He's the guy who's got the relationship with the farmer. He's the guy who's got the knowledge. He's the guy putting across the message, not only hopefully from our company and the suppliers, but also from CropLife. So some of the identified challenges, probably be remiss of me not to mention our friend the registrar, who doesn't do his job, but enough said. Rising costs, which was well pointed out by Derek, and we're well aware of the impacts of what's going on at the registrar's office, why we've got reduced options, and why costs are rising, and the difficulties now of being cost competitive in farming. Fingers, I feel, were pointed at our crop advisors, particularly so in the grain industry, where they feel that the guys are not perhaps pulling their weight and maybe just throwing prices out there. So there's a challenge. There's a challenge to our guys not in the high value segment. And I'm not only pointing fingers at you, in fact, it's not me who's pointing the figures. But we can lift ourselves up. Derek accused the guy, is one chap that he asked to leave, of selling on margin. His program that he presented to him to choose his crop protection products was based on the margin he could make. Our good crop advisors are not doing that. So I put it to ourselves there, we need to raise the standards. Yeah, the whole value chain needs to be involved. And I confronted Derek, and I confronted him at lunchtime, not confronted him, we had a very amicable chat, I think. The onus is on the farmers too, our agents, our suppliers, everybody, to raise our standards and only use registered products and follow the label. Jou uitdaging, meneer Dr. Verdoorn. Don't know, the challenge to bring these guys to book, and I'd like to mention an example. We sat in at a SAMIC meeting the other day where the topic on the table was unregistered products. There's a trend now because Group 3 or M registration seem to be easier to bring to the market than L registrations with what's going on at the registrar's office. Skalk Skuman, who's with SAMIC and a very knowledgeable entomologist, pointed out the fact that one of the producers in the Lowvelds had R1 million worth of damage because he bought an unregistered product from a non-accredited guy, from a non-recognizable company. And I question the farmers. You'll challenge our accredited crop advisors for 50 cents on a product, but you'll go and buy from a nobody a product that you never heard of before, and there's a risk. And read the label, please. I think that message has come through quite clearly a number of times, and I want to give you another example. Farmers too don't read the label. We're dealing with a complaint at the moment where our crop advisor gave the correct recommendation for insecticide. The lady in the depot was busy with her admin, and she gave a price by mistake through on a herbicide. The farmer walked in, bought the herbicide, and sprayed it. Didn't ask if it was the right product, didn't check the label, didn't ask for advice, sprayed it, and did a lot of damage to his cucurbit. So the responsibility rests with all of us. The opportunities, extend the CPD, the Continuous Professional Development Base, on all levels. There are a lot of our crop advisors out there who are not accepting of the system, try to take shortcuts. So I'm appealing all to you. I think what we've been talking about the last 2 days has shown the commitment that CropLife is showing to raising standards and to uplifting our industry. A lot of people mentioned the fact that the pharmaceutical and medical industries have this as regulatory, and I think a lot of us would like to see it go that way. We're pushing. In fact, Marius told me he's not going to get off Exco until he sees it happen. So we might have a very grey-bearded Mr. Boshoff over there. Yeah, and there's an opportunity to show the merit for those of us who still haven't recognized the merit in crop life and belonging and the value in the CPD, and hopefully that message that we're carrying across to farmers to support only the accredited guys, the proper chaps in the industry. Raise standards, I say it again, I've said it before, I thought I'd put it in again there, and my last point is crop life still toothless? I think we've proven in the last couple of days how serious we are about this industry. And the appeal is out there to everybody in our industry. All you, all my colleagues, all us guys, we're friends out there. I don't think crop life's toothless. The fingers point back. Somebody earlier said the 3 pointers point back at us. It's be part of the solution and not part of the problem. We're not a toothless industry. Thank you, Gerhard. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. I could hear there's a bit of personalization in your feedback there. That's very good.
A bit of emotion.
Yeah. Without emotions, you're not a human being. Thank you very much. Our last wrapper up is Marius Boshoff, and he will be talking about the advocacy session.
Also, first time I'm using it. Oh, great. There you go. It's on. Huh? Just press it. That's it. Great. Yeah, I can't other but reflect on the last 5 years and maybe even a little bit further. And I see Marcel was here. Essentially, we, as an industry, as members, we got together and we strategized and we said 5 years ago that effectively we mandated, then appointed a new team and led by Rod. And that team had to look after a few things. One of them, engaging with regulatory authorities, setting up training, managing stewardship, and communication. And I think if we listen and see a lot of what has been happening and throughout all of these sessions, you can take that view and say, so from my side, certainly Rod and team, Elriza, well done. You guys have certainly moved the industry, Gerhard, into a new direction. So no, we're not toothless. I remember we said towards 2021. We're in 2022 now. So again, well done. So if you just look at some of the communication, so Elriza coming in and talking about these things, it's really good to see it. We still struggle with those things, the science versus the beliefs. And how do we communicate in the industry where we've gone through COVID and data and science and anti-vaxxers and vaxxers and so forth, and everyone struggles with this communication. And how do we communicate that? Because sometimes I still believe that we lose the customers out there. So I'm taking that and the value that we have brought, the level of communication that the industry has really come up with, from Twitter to Facebook to all of those things. So please go and like and share whatever is posted. So, and how do we get in front of those negative narratives? I think, Mfundo, that's one of the key things that we need to get in front of and say, do we engage? And when do we engage? And I think it closed out very nicely with the talk around the journalism. Agri-Intel, it's been one of those tools that has been developed. It's a what? It replaced the old bots books. You will not believe me when I move in the industry and I still have people asking me, when are we bringing out the new books? And I just want to tear my hair out. So we've moved on, but we have to remember, and there are constant evolution in that tool. And Sean Ali and team has done a tremendous, the amount of data that has been over the many years has put in the area. I don't know, can we put a value to Agri-Intel? Probably not. It's going to take you 20 years to do it. And just moving that into the next phases, it's not over. There's new things that's coming, and I think what we can get there is also, the wheat module that's been launched, and there's now the adjacent technologies that's interested. Let's call it the M registrations or the bio products or the potentially, the sky's the limit. There's interest from other countries that might be looking at that. So I think Agri-Intel is here to stay, and we're still going to work on it. And we're probably going to have to upgrade it to smartphone at some point as well. The next point I think that came out really nicely through Gerhard's talk is the collaboration. I love the word collaborate. It's either co-labor or co-laboratory. So Gerhard and team, you guys did really well in driving that small container forum or small pack forum. And like you said, these are people who do this for the love of the story, not for payment. These are member associations. So thanks for that. And I think that's also a really nice feedback that we got from that. In terms of the product labels, I think we still struggle. Again, we're a data science, data-driven industry, and we tend to over-communicate data. And it doesn't come through. So the labels are sometimes ambiguous on the one side and sometimes too overly legally written and detailed that people don't understand what they read. And it's therefore a requirement that we have to make sure that we can transfer the knowledge. And we look at these things, especially Brian Caron's talk. Brian thinks like a lawyer. He thinks he's sitting in front of the judge and he's thinking of all of those things. And those of you who have dealt with that before will recognize that you've got to think about those things. You usually have a contract only when things go south. And that's when we have to look at these things. So these were the identified challenges for us in the industry. I think just want to go back, and it's really connected with the main themes as well. So I'm not going to go back to the main themes at this stage. So what are the opportunities? There's always opportunities for us to take from these projects. The one is communication. And I love the way that you've put it. It's not communication, it's from lobbying to advocacy. And that makes a lot of sense. But don't forget, communicating is, you've got to be out there in front of the consumer and in front of everyone in order to educate and inform. And that is what we need to do more. Well, not just what, how and why. If we as an industry understand why we do things, if we believe in what we do is significant for sustainability, then that why starts coming and it starts speaking to people's hearts. And consumers have values. They don't think with their minds, they think with their hearts. It's what I love and and it's very important aspects that we need to think about how we communicate and then why. Farmers need to understand that training and the power of a certified, qualified individual that gives that advice. And I think that is something, it's an opportunity for us to, you were jokingly saying, but I kid you not, we need a statutory situation where it's a pharmacist that makes that recommendation, not just any guy that spends 2 or 3 seasons in the field. It has to be statutory in order for this to get there. So I'm going to stick around until you retire, Rod. Agri-Intel, again, the de facto standard. Fantastic tool. Let's engage with government. I don't think we should keep it. Let's use it to engage with government and let's go forward in providing this information to the industry. And I love the idea of, it's been hearing that there's a barley passport, there's Global Gap, there's Tesco's Nature Choice, there's all of these secondary protocols or standards that we have to comply with. Why not the grain industry? Why not the whole of the industry? Is that if we're really serious about food safety, food security, and if listening to the legislation on extended producer responsibilities, if we're really serious about that, then I do believe that these type of passports are going to help us to get there. And those who've been around, Europe Gap was implemented in South Africa in 1997. It's now, how many years is that? Freaking long time ago. And it's now called Global Gap. And it's constantly evolving. And it is a system that if you export, that is the minimum you've got to do. And part of that is compliance criteria. It's complying to certain things. And I think these passports will allow to drive quality, drive the qualification, the certification of the advice that we get. I hope I've said enough. I don't want to keep on. I think everyone wants to go to the pub. Good. Thank you very much. And thank you for organizing this. Also, I'm sure on behalf of all the members here. Thank you, Gerhard and team.
Thank you, Marius. I need to do a quick wrap-up of the session on the end of product life cycle. Now, I don't have a presentation because Ariza put me into the management chair there, and I didn't have time to type it up. So I'll quickly give you a brief rundown of what came out of that session. First of all, plastic pollution is a global nasty reality, and our industry does contribute something to it, albeit a very small percentage. It doesn't mean we shy away from our responsibilities, and our pesticide packaging need not to be a contributor to the global plastic pollution. In South Africa, we have new regulations coming to pass very soon. We just heard from Mishelle, it's been signed off by the Minister. Within a couple of days, should be in the Government Gazette notice. So that is something that came out very positively from the authorities towards us. We also heard from Koot and from Walter often that there's a very strong recycling ethos in the country. There's a strong recycling network. We also heard from Kirsten that recycling seems to go in sine waves, up and down, up and down. The market demands seem to go up and down. But we heard from Walter now that the demand for the HDPE, which is our primary type of package in the country, that is increasing day by day. So these are the key messages I got out of the presentation this afternoon. The challenges are the following. We only had the first manufacturer of an empty container, of a new container now, looking at PCR content into a new container. Walter told you he's been up and down between manufacturers himself, and I've been talking to them for the past, I think it's between 5 and 12 years we started talking about this. Only now we come to the fore. So the challenge is, how do we get all the other 6 or 7 drum manufacturers, for want of a better word, to also start looking at using PCR in the new containers? And how do we push them to start getting us to a point in 5 years from now, we say we've got an 80% or a 90% or even 100% totally recycled new plastic container for the pesticide in the country. A challenge for us is the end user, meaning either the consumer or the farmer is not fully on board yet in terms of recycling ethos. And it becomes a challenge when you listen to Koot. We heard something from Walter also on the note that we still battle with this triple rinsing principle. We still battle with a principle that many farmers say, but I've never heard of the recycling. I don't know who we can engage to either take our empty containers to work and collect the containers from our farms. So that to us is one of the biggest challenges. We know there are plastics. We know they are available. But the question is, can you transport them? No, you can't, because they're not triple rinsed. So they are classified automatically in terms of the NEM waste that as a hazardous material, and you've got compliance issues. So we have to overcome this challenge by making sure every container is triple rinsed by every owner. We also have 1 or 2 problematic waste streams. We mentioned the PET containers in the pesticide industry, which is a big challenge for us. We have to overcome it. The only easiest way to do it is to say we move over to HDP only for the plastic containers and nothing else. And then we also heard from Koot, we heard from Kirsten, we heard from Walter also that the attachment material for the label onto a plastic container is a problem. Okay, so these are the challenges. The opportunities, I think, that I took home from the presentation, the EPR to us is a fantastic and a valuable tool to give responsibility and the sort of management up to us in CropLife SA as the pesticide industry to take over this thing and say, right, now we can take control. The government gives us a mandate to say, we're going to manage all packaging in the country. We're going to be managing all pesticide obsolete stocks in the country also. So it's a grand opportunity. What we heard from Walter, and which I'm very confident about, is that the market demands for good recycled HDPE are enormous. Our industry cannot even meet 5% of the market demand. So it means that no pesticide container on the farm should lie there. It's a valuable thing that can go into the value chain, can be used by somebody to create job for people and eventually make a new commodity like a pesticide container or a good plastic pallet or even a low-value commodity like plastic wood and garden furniture. And I think the last thing from my side in terms of opportunities is our current network of recyclers is now virtually saturated. All right? Do we need more recyclers or do we need to certify more people? I don't think so. So we cannot take away the business from our current recyclers that have been supporting us over the past 8 to 10 years, but we need to give them more capacity. We need to give them a bit more kickback from our side, and we need to help them to be more known amongst our farmers out there, And I would like to believe in 5 years from now, no farmer can say to us, but I don't know what to do with the empty container. And folks, with that, I wrap up myself, I wrap up the session, and I'm glad to hand over to Rod to do the final thank yous for the conference and the wrap up.
Thanks, Gerhard. Mishelle, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here for the last session, so thank you for that. If you remember back to me standing here to open yesterday, excuse me, I said you'll see there's a common theme, and that common theme was stewardship. You might have wondered that we've maybe moved to an aviation theme with Hank's awesome presentation and the paracats that we heard about today. But seriously, I hope you can all see the theme and the thread of stewardship went through everything we've discussed the last 2 days. It's a non-negotiable for the industry association. We also say a lot all the time about CropLife is a non-statutory body. It's a voluntary body. It's an industry association, but you're not forced to join it. At the same time, however, it's only as strong as the participation of the members. And again, led very strongly by Henk and other of our EXCO the last 2 days, we do need more and more participation by members. If we're going to continue to meet the new goals that we set every year, we can't do it with a small team. Yes, it's the best team I've ever worked with. Yes, they're all damn good, but there are limits. We have capacity. We can't keep bringing things in. We do need assistance from the industry. So thank you for your future support, I will put it that way. So as we close down, we would like to thank all of the participants who joined virtually. Again, sorry for the connectivity glitches at the beginning yesterday morning, but we're grateful that Brand Republic fixed those very rapidly. Thank you for all the participants in the audience. You have to agree with me, we would not have had such great and entertaining discussions if there wasn't input and interaction from everybody on the floor and also online. I'm not going to single out people. Yes, Alriza drove getting this conference going. It was hugely supported by Gerhard with his experience. Of course, Shana was involved. Nadia was involved. Fikile, wow, poor Fikile when it comes to regulatory. So I don't know how we're going to face Jonathan with some of the comments that were made, but we'll get there. We've got colleagues down in the Cape who didn't make it up. Luigi is about to be a mom again in a few weeks. And Liesel also. And if I've forgotten somebody in my own little team, of course, the plant biotechnology, and of course, Chantal, who's joined us as well. I cannot thank the team enough. We do everything as a team. We're small enough to still do it. So everybody has a finger in everything we do. So sincere thanks. And of course, to the CropLife Exco for agreeing to our crazy idea to bring this conference along. We're certainly not disappointed, and I certainly hope EXCO is not disappointed. I believe we hit all the boxes we said we would, and hopefully even more. So I thank you all. Those of you who are in the room, come join us for a bit of networking, and till the next CropCon. Thank you, everybody.